And what I'll do now is hand control back to Jack, just to give us a summing up for closing and share some of his thoughts with all of you. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jed. Thanks, everyone. And sorry to stand between you and growling stomachs and lunch. We're going to try and make this entertaining. And the first thing I would just like to do is to just ask Judith, there you are in the back, Judith, if you have anything you'd like to add to the scoring system we've already done in the workshop this morning, or do you want to use it as an, do you want to share some of that with folks and get a little?
So long as you like to buy gorgeous sofa.
Oh, happy to. Yeah, it makes you feel good. Isn't that nice? So good getting a compliment.
Sorry, my assistant.
I'll take it. You want me to hold that up?
So there were six questions that seem to things used to aggregate seem to aggregate around. So the first one was, and not surprisingly, how do we create a sense of community belonging in online pedagogy around connection, common good, social relationships, and peer-to-peer teaching? How do students studying online experience the same learning outcomes? Does it matter? And if it does, what does it mean? What kind of students undertake online learning? And can we identify what scaffolding is required to ensure retention and success? How do we ensure our learner and analytics are reflecting engagement with online learning? And the 5 and 6 are actually related. What are the inherent skills required by lecturers, teachers, tutors for online learning? And what are the inherent skills required by students for online learning? So I think we've got some really interesting and good questions. So we'll take those on and think about how we can respond to them.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Fantastic. All right, so we have 45 minutes for me to try and make this as useful as possible for everyone. And I have so far just managed to freak out everyone in our organization because I have not told them anything about what I'm going to say. And there are definitely no slides because we've had enough of those. Although I have to say Sherwin's slides are pretty good. So actually particularly glad that I don't have any because they would be a disappointment. Before we came, I was not aware of this, but we asked everyone what you were hoping to get out of this event. So I have a list of comments and feedback that we received, and I'm gonna sort of intersperse my comments with reading some of those out and asking if people feel like they've gotten some insight into what it was they were hoping to learn. If you did, that's great. If you didn't, now is your chance to ask me, and I will try to answer, or I will suggest who might have an answer for you. I'm gonna intersperse that with some stories, because I think that as much as we all want to think that data is what really matters and numbers and figures, we just live by telling stories, and it became eminently clear to me this morning, we're trying to do that workshop that Judith facilitated so well, and I forget who it was, someone had a comment about wanting to be able to, trying to deal with the scale of all of our institutions and how many students we're trying to support, while at the same time thinking about the fact that every single person there is an individual, and we need to try and help them on their learning journey. And how do you square that issue of we have 47,000 students or 19,000 or whatever the number is, but it's a huge number, and everyone's on their own journey. And how do we personalize that? And every one of our universities has probably grown by 50 to 100% in the last 6 or 8 years. So whatever the problems were that you had in 2010 are already 50 to 100% bigger. Plus, we also know that as we keep talking, everyone's world is being condensed, I don't even know what I did with it, down onto a little phone, a little tiny screen. And just to give you a sense of how crazy that little screen is, I was just trying to do a little math and I got stuck this morning, but I was thinking back in the late 1980s, there was a real estate bubble in Tokyo, in Japan. Some of you might be old enough to remember that, or maybe not. But back then there was some talk about the Imperial Palace in Tokyo being worth more than all the real estate in California, and which made people laugh. And 1 square meter of land in one particular area, downtown Tokyo, being worth $750,000 per square meter. I don't know if that was US or what, but $750,000 for 1 square meter. Well, I was just doing a little math with some help from Adam and Christine. And if you think about that, that was a lot of money then. But the most valuable piece of real estate today, well, one company just surpassed the $1 trillion market capitalization. That's Apple. People might have seen that in the news the other day. And if you figure that, yeah, they've got a lot of products, but mostly this was the iPhone that did this. The iPhone has 60 square centimeters on the biggest iPhone screen. What does that make a square centimeter worth, right? It's like $19 billion. For a square centimeter, a square centimeter is 0.6% of a square meter. The value, we're all living and dying by those 60 square centimeters. That's it. That's all there is. And that's where we have to try and figure out how to capture people's attention and tell stories that are going to be useful. It's a horrible thought, I know. I mean, it's a terrifying thought because that screen is so small. And I assume everyone had the same experience I had walking here this morning, which is that it's so irritating. Everyone is no one here was doing this, I know, but everyone else was staring at their screen and kind of walking very slowly on a little zigzag down the middle of the sidewalk. And that's what we have become. We have just zeroed our lives down into 60 square centimeters of somehow the most mesmerizing space in the world, right? I mean, we must look like idiots to some people who don't live this way, but I don't know, but we have to accept the fact that that's where we are at. So that was one story that I just thought I would share with you, and just a little bit of food for thought. Practical ideas to address challenges and improve quality. Have we talked at all about that? I don't know. Do people feel like that's been addressed? You got any practical ideas, things to take home? Or insight into how Studiosity adds value? I hope so. I mean, part of what I hope you saw was so useful or valuable here was that last 2 sessions from Adam and Sherwin. Look, I don't know that many organizations that would open up the door and say, here's what's going on with what we're building and what we're doing. And by the way, we really want your feedback and input into this. They're either way too secretive and think that everything they do is IP that is the secret ingredients to Coca-Cola or the algorithm in Google, so they'll never share that. Or they're way too big and bureaucratic, so they'll never have the capacity to get through the army of lawyers that would stop them from ever opening their mouths in a situation like this. You can imagine if we were a much, much bigger organization, there would be a lawyer in here listening and checking and putting up his hand or her hand and saying, probably shouldn't say that. So hopefully you get a sense that what we're trying to do here is to be as open and transparent as we possibly can, recognizing that all of you are both collegial and competing, particularly competing for students, since more and more of them exist in 60 square centimeters and not physically in Adelaide or Auckland or Perth or wherever. Oh, this silly computer. There it goes. There are settings in here that are really irritating, just to let you know. One of the things that I took away from today and yesterday is something that we all talk about, but I don't know that we really live, and I thought I'd tell a story about this, which is this idea of always learning or being open to new ideas. And how many people feel like they've learned something in the last 2 days? That's good. Was it at all? Did it make you uncomfortable when you were learning it? Did it cause you to throw out an idea that you held dear to your heart? Or was it that kind of learning, or was it sort of a, there's another brick, I'll put that in the pile? A little bit of both? Anything that you really didn't think was something that fit your view, but you now have sort of opened your mind? Any particular way? So I had a moment like that this week that was so uncomfortable and so unpleasant and so difficult. And looking back on it, it wasn't a big deal. But beforehand, I built it up in my mind. It was going to be this huge, huge thing. So we've been thinking a lot, as you can see, we've been thinking a lot about 60 square centimeters and what's going on these phones and why people do what they do on them, right? We don't want to know everything they do, that's for sure. But just the learning bit, which is probably 2.8% or something, right? Because so much of it is just the world's biggest distraction device. But, why and how are students using them the way they do? And why and how are subject specialists using them the way they do? And we are endlessly puzzled by this. It's really, really difficult to understand. And I spent the last couple of months thinking, why do our specialists behave in the way that they're doing? They keep doing these things in these patterns, but we didn't seem to know enough about why they were, working at certain times, not working at other times, wanting work when we didn't want them to work, not wanting work when we wanted them to work, and we've got all these complicated problems. I mean, don't mean to bore you with it, but it's actually, this is the key to making the whole thing work, right? I mean, that whole story about the student and the specialist, it only works if, he's willing to stop doing his laundry, which no doubt he was. And he's going to be in a lot of trouble when there's a big pile of wet laundry when his partner comes home. But he has to be willing to stop, or we have to give him some way or some motivation to do that right then and there. Otherwise, she's not going to be happy, and then she's never going to come back, right? And forget about coming back to Studiosity. Maybe she drops out of unit, right, or gives up on that unit. So there's a moment there, and you only get a couple of those before things go off the rails. So I thought, who's getting people to do things when they don't want to do them, right? And I don't know about you, but how many people in the last 48 hours have used an Uber or a ride-sharing service? Yeah. And in the last week? Yeah. In the last month? And do you prefer it to a taxi or not? Yeah. So I thought about this too, and I was like, it's so much better. I don't even think about it. I'm like, I need a car, like now. And I thought, how the hell do they get people to do that, right? I mean, I don't want to drive I don't know who these people are, but they seem to just show up at the weirdest times, wherever I happen to be, and they're like, yeah, let's go. Wherever it is, let's just go and do that. So I thought, I need to be an Uber driver. So I said, geez, and I mentioned this at work, and they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. Why are you going to do, what could you learn? I was like, I don't know what I'm going to learn. And they said, oh, you go and look online. You can Google it and find out what's happening. I said, well, yeah, we found a lot. But you don't find out by reading about it like you do from doing it. So first of all, I got to tell you, it is really hard to get approved to be an Uber driver, which shocked me, but I'm glad now that I know that it takes a long time. There's a lot of hoops. It's just a big pain. So I don't recommend it from that perspective if you're not planning on really jumping in. But so I finally did get approved last week, and I was like, oh, now I actually have to do this. And I was, as I mentioned yesterday, being the introvert that I am, the idea of strangers jumping in the backseat of my car or front seat, not something that I was happy with at all. But I was like, I've got to do this. If I don't do it, I'm going to not understand. How does this app work? How does it get me to do stuff that I wouldn't otherwise necessarily think I should do? So I drove one of my colleagues to the airport because I wanted to have a chat with him. And then I thought, right, there I am at the airport. It's 4:00. There's got to be a million people that want to ride here. So, I turn this app on and start waiting. And first, nothing happens. And then I realized I was in the airport zone. And so was everybody else. And because I was the guy who'd never driven anyone anywhere, they weren't going to ask me. They were going to ask the 70 other people waiting. So I just drove around the corner. And as soon as I did, all of a sudden, the thing starts beeping. And it says, go and pick this person up around the corner. So I drove to pick up Ling. I was like, okay. So I went to pick up Ling, and I got there 2 minutes later, and looked around. I didn't see anyone that looked like they were looking for a ride. So I was just in the process of, the texting bit where you're kind of wondering who's who. And then both doors open, and 2 people hop in, Ling and her friend. And I look at the app, and first of all, it's very hard to tell where you're going with the Uber app. It's like painting by numbers. You just follow the lines. It's not like what we did. There's no creativity here. You just follow the line. So I'm driving and looking, and they're speaking in Mandarin happily. Just that's what they're doing. And I had that moment then for about a minute. I'm just driving 2 Chinese people around Sydney. This is really odd and a little bit disturbing, but also a great kind of insight that it's okay, I can do this. There they are in the car, and they wanted to go to the rocks. So we drive to the rocks at 5:15. I was getting dark, and I was like, no, I don't mind the driving part. So they get out, and I'm just trying to figure out this crazy app and saying, oh yeah, they were really nice. I'll give them 5 stars, and it beeps again, and it's like, there's Monique around the corner. You need to go and get her. So I know that they rate you badly if you don't accept the ride. So I'm like, all right, I gotta, the whole idea was to just do this once. But I end up saying, okay, I'm gonna have to go and get Monique. So, he's on one of those streets just right under the Harbor Bridge, and the traffic is ridiculous. So it's what should be 2 minutes is 10. I pick her up, and it's really impossible to tell where she wants to go, and she's from Melbourne, and so she doesn't really know. But it's 2 kilometers away. Look, would have been so much faster to walk, but we drove the 2 kilometers, and we got there, and I, literally trying to drive across Sydney in the middle of peak hour is not fun. And I thought, right, I've got to figure out how to turn this thing off. So before I rated, I figured, go offline. I got that part. And I went offline, and I said she was fine. She was very nice. I thought, right, well, you can tell it that you want to drive towards home. Twice a day, you can tell it where you want to go. So I did, and then turned it back on. It beeps again, instantly. So they've clearly figured out the on-demand thing, right? People are just queued up, and they are just sending out messages constantly. And then, and this was someone who, Katrina, who wanted to be picked up, and she was from London, and she's just like, oh, I'm just on the corner I'm on Park Street between Pitt and George. Can you pick me up there? And if you know Sydney at all, that's the worst place. It's like Times Square. It is just terrible. So I drove, because it says you have to do it. And, and so I picked her up, and she got in the car, and she fortunately wanted to go out of the city, across the bridge, which was very nice. I had this deep fear that I was going to end up in somewhere way out west, and it was going to take me hours to get home, and I was just going to be really kind of annoyed. But anyway, we drove up there, and she was very pleasant, and I had my first chatting experience talking to one of these people, which is apparently what people want to do, and I think that's exactly what I don't want to do when I'm in the riding part, so I wasn't doing that. But anyway, so we chatted, and afterwards, she hops out, and I think, I am exhausted. But then she gave me a compliment, and it pops up in the app right away, and it says, oh, you have a compliment. Would you like to see what it is? And I have to say, as much as I know all this stuff is, worth whatever the molecules, the electrons are that make it say you have a compliment, gee, it was nice to get a compliment after an hour and 45 minutes of driving through hell. And it almost made me pick someone else up. But it didn't. But anyway, so and it said I was a good conversationalist, which shocked me. And now, of course, I'm getting all these messages from Uber saying, well, that was great. Why don't you do that again? There's more rides to be had. This is where they are. Anyway, so the point of it was just, that was not a comfortable experience. It was not what I intended. But I feel now like I've started, and I'm going to go do it again. There's a lot more to learn. But I figured this was a great way to learn how a company that spent billions of dollars trying to understand this sort of a marketplace could be useful to us. So I just thought I'd share that story with you because that was an example of something where I actually did have that feeling of euphoria that, wow, I did something that I really hadn't wanted to do, but I knew I really should do. And then I did it and it wasn't that bad. So anyway, that was my learning for the week. And I guess my point there is, I don't think we do that much of that. That is not something that we really do. You might read something, find something unusual that you might or might not digest or absorb, but that kind of learning is hard. So I'll be the first to admit, like, I haven't had that kind of feeling in a while. To be inspired to create a student-first initiative or to be inspired about the future of education. That's what some of you wanted. Did anyone get any inspiration? A little bit? Yeah. Sort of? Strategies and ideas about improving the student journey or the student experience? I hope so. Student-centric approaches to our work in academic support, and how others model student expectations and usage of Studiosity. I mean, I hope you've all had a good chance to talk amongst yourselves and to hear what's working and what's not. I mean, we have a huge amount of knowledge about what works with this service. And one of the things, I'll be really open and honest with you, one of the things that is a real frustration for us is when we don't get asked about what makes the biggest difference or what can work well. Universities are places of expertise, and people who are experts know that they know things. And there's so many people at universities, so there's so many experts, there's so much knowledge, and they know so many things. And I think personally, there's sometimes a little bit of an assumption that we've got this. We know this. We know what's happening here. And one of the things that I have learned doing what we're doing here is that I've known next to nothing the entire time. And the hardest thing to do is to just throw away every assumption I have about what I think is working and always say, I don't know. I don't know what's working. Who can I ask that can help? Because somebody else probably knows more about this or has done this. That's why I went and had that Uber experience. Because I just know we don't know everything, but we do know a lot. And about one little tiny piece of the student experience, one little thing that is a really powerful part. You know, as you can see, you know, we don't make up these comments, but I did get a comment from a student, saw a comment from a student this morning that just reminded me of this, and it was something, you know, as a first-year student in Victoria who said, "Thank you for a great service. Being a first-year undergraduate and an online student, it can be a little isolating. This service has helped to eliminate that." So I saw that and I thought, that's another little example. We're not making these interactions up, but how do we reach those sorts of students? And there's a lot of concern that we saw those two fabulous students, Julie and Claire, yesterday, and people thought, well, that's two. And those two are exceptional people because they're really motivated learners. What about the others? And this has been a concern at every university that we work with. How do we know we're not just helping the students who need the help the least? We're going to do well anyway. And does our research show that the help seekers that are doing this? It's a good question and it's a fair question. And you know, Julie and Claire showed up here because they put their hands up, and we asked a lot of people. We just put a call out to people at WSU and thought, would anyone be interested in doing this? And they put their hands up mostly because they felt like they wanted to give us something back because we'd helped them so much. So they self-identified as wanting to do that, and that's why they were the way that they were. But but there are literally thousands of other students at WSU who are using the service, and they're not all, I'm sure, as motivated or as determined to get HDs or as they were. If they were, Denise, the bill would be so much bigger.
Well, I can reinforce that all of our students are not as motivated.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we wouldn't, I mean, so exactly. So because we couldn't afford, they're doing something, and we saw how strategic they were about using what they had, and they had figured out a lot, right? I mean, sometimes we think students, and because we tell stories and we talk to individuals, the last student we talked to who seemed kind of clueless and hadn't realized that there was a limit or how to use the internet or upload it, and think, oh my God, everyone's a disaster. And then the next one comes along and they've figured out that there's 400 minutes left, and if they cut the bibliography out of their document, they can squeeze 3 more essays in. And you're like, oh my God, these kids are geniuses, right? So we're only as good as the last story or two in our head. But it's our sense is that the students don't, there's a small portion of students that may self-select and find service like Studiosity and make the most of it. But most of them do what they're told about, what they're informed about. That doesn't mean they do everything you tell them to do, for sure. Otherwise, we'd have a 98% continuation rate and we wouldn't have all the challenges we have. But most of them are responding to the communication that they receive. And I think there's a lot that we can all learn to do better in terms of communicating to students and what constitutes getting a good message, a consistent message, and a repeated message to students so that they do internalize this and develop a behavior. You guys have all heard the story, it takes 7 or 9 repetitions for people to remember something. Do you think you've told students how many times to hand in their homework? And what percentage do, right? But how many times has Coca-Cola told you to drink Coke? They still do it, right? For a reason. It does work. But coming back to that idea of the expert, that's part of why we brought Judith and Chris, several other people onto our advisory board to really give us that expert insight into the most senior levels of the academic mind, and to help us understand how we can make sure that we're being as responsive as possible. That's been hugely important to us, and I hope that you feel free to ask them questions. That's, not necessarily today, but anytime you want to reach out to them and to query what they think or what their experiences are or what their thoughts are or how what their thoughts are about what we're trying to do. That's been a huge benefit for us. I don't know if folks here have thought at all about the benefit of expertise, but have you ever tried to do something yourself and you've realized that you're totally unqualified for that? Income tax, yeah, right? Well, that's kind of too bad too, right? Because they've created an industry for accountants to do this stuff for us that shouldn't really exist. But is there what else? Like what else we find you've discovered that you really shouldn't mess with it?
DIY.
Everything. Yeah. See, I think that stands for do it yourself, right? Because if I try that, people like, if you want it broken, ask me. Break it yourself. That's my skill level. I'm a disaster. Every time I go into Bunnings, forget about the $200 that you have to spend when you go to Bunnings. It's the $500 repair bill for the thing you busted. Yeah. Anything else?
I cut my daughter's hair once.
Yeah. Once. Yeah.
But I didn't ever get
And she didn't mind, but it was Michelle, right? She just.
wasn't a good outcome.
Yeah. My brother cut my son's hair. Oh my God, and my wife freaked out. Well, he got the clippers out, right? And he's like, what the heck did you just do? And I was like, it'll grow. He's the boy. And she's like, I don't care. That's my boy. How could you let that happen? Experts. I've told some people this story, but when we rebranded our company, we almost thought that we could just make up a name because the name doesn't really matter. What really matters is what you do. Well, we almost had a very bad outcome from doing that, right? And I'm sure lots of you have been through this experience. I know Denise at Western Sydney's been through that experience, and you would have had probably 10 times the 100 times the consultation and the effort, probably bringing back bad memories of that now. Yeah, but the process of going through a rebranding, or I don't know if you were, Chris, at CQU when it was University of Central Queensland. That was before your time. Well, but these are huge, huge decisions. And for us, we, fortunately were rescued by some of the folks at Southern Cross and a few other places who said, this is a really good idea to make a change, but this isn't the change. And then we went and we talked to some experts, and they said, well, a lot of people start down the path of rebranding, and then they think it's like making spaghetti, and you throw a few ideas on the wall, and the piece that sticks is, that's the name you should have, and it's just brainstorming anyway, and then, it's all good. I said, you didn't do that, did you? And we looked at each other, and we're like, maybe? Then they took us on a 6-month journey about how it's done with a proper system and process, and here's how we'll get you to the result that you want. And we don't know what that'll be, but we're going to find it through a very rigorous process. And gee, that expertise was valuable. I mean, my first thought was, oh my God, this is expensive. My last thought was, what a bargain. So the value of that expertise is huge. What else did we learn in the last couple of days besides the annoying settings on computers? Networking and learning from other people's experiences and stories more broadly. That seems like what a lot of people have wanted. Customizing Studiosity, making it more personal or more unique to your university. That's been a lot of the work that we have been doing. Has that been useful to hear about or to see how this can, we had a lot of debates internally, especially when we had this beautiful new brand. Doesn't everyone want this? And then, it turns out everyone else has their own brand that they kind of like as well. And maybe even more than ours. And we sort of sat around and said, yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. And that's when we said, okay, no matter how beautiful this is and how well it works for everyone, we need to figure out how to make this part of their brand and their story. But we need to do that in a way where we also don't completely get, buried beneath a layer upon layer on the 1/4 of 1/10 of a square centimeter somewhere inside a screen so that we disappear. So there's a lot of tension there, but there's a lot of goodness that comes out of doing that well. What else did people learn?
I really want to look at the stats of what students are using the mobile app.
Yeah. To understand what's going on with the mobile app. Yeah.
And find out ways to promote that to national.
Isn't it interesting that everyone wants something on their mobile phone? And when I don't know how many screenshots we showed, but every one of them has a link to the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And yet not that many students really. I mean, I'm surprised that more aren't downloading it. So they're seeing the app links there. But this is what's remarkable. I don't know what the average age of all the students who are using Studiosity is, but it's sadly younger than most of us. And they're creatures of habit. They're not even seeing those links. They are going straight to the thing that they used once or twice or 5 times and have had a good experience. So we need to figure out how to encourage them and to download them. Our subject specialists is a different story. We can pretty much make them download the app, which is, and by putting information in that they can't get through their desktop application, we can force them to use the app and start to use that app so that we can ultimately create that whole learning experience in, of the 24/7 on-demand experience. But for students, maybe we need to think about that. What will make the app so compelling that you really want to be in there? And my first thought was, well, even if I'm just uploading documents, I'd like to get a notification on my phone that my document's ready. That would be nice to know, because sometimes it comes back in a few hours and sometimes it comes back in the next day. But
Can access that myself, actually.
Right.
I use it
Yeah.
personally.
well, right. So it's there's lots more that we can do, and I think that by thinking about how other organizations have and are solving this problem, Uber is just one. But I think we'll learn a lot about what will hopefully encourage students to get more engaged with the app. I think having the the university branding in there will help as well, particularly when the service itself has been branded as Allen or Study Coach or whatever it is. There's then we don't really want there to be a disconnect between the desktop usage experience and the mobile app-based experience.
I think if you gave us those analytics, that would also help, because it would be really useful for us to see who is using it, but it would also be great for us to see if they're not using it, because then we could also be pushing it through our marketing as well, and encouraging students to use it. So I don't know if it's possible, but what about including it on our weekly reports, just a little thing?
What about including it on weekly reports? Yeah, there's something. I'm assuming someone
So
wrote.
I'm asking to come back to you all the time. So
Yeah.
that's where we have to do that now.
Yeah.
It's something that we can do.
Yeah, or maybe that's something that ends up in the data warehouse, or this is the sort of things that, believe me, we don't want to be pulling information individually or even weekly either. If this is something where we can help you see an impact that something you've just done has had in 24 or 48 hours, you can watch it yourself. That's even better. Yeah.
Because that'd be very easy to, if we got the stats as of now, did a marketing promo, this very easy to
see a spike. Yeah. And there's no doubt there's more. There are more things that students are going to want to tell us they want the app to do, and when we do start to move towards this potential 24/7 model, I think that the app itself will become that much more valuable for those live interactions, at any time, and especially if we're able to expand the sorts of subjects that we can support, letting specialists who've got some additional expertise. It's one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time. We have hundreds and hundreds of these people. We have a limited number of subjects that we staff for, because it's very expensive to say, well, between these hours, we'll always have people with these expertises online. But if we didn't have to say that, if we simply were able to say, look, we have all of these subjects available, and some of these people, and here's a list of all of them, and be a lot more subjects. Just, someone like the mentor Jack that you saw yesterday, he'd probably be able to help with a lot more subjects than we actually offer. And if we gave him the opportunity to say, yeah, I can help with all these other subjects that I've done in my honors degree or my master's degree, and he were to indicate when he might be available and receptive to a request, we could then vastly expand the number of subjects, topics that students can ask questions about. And that's what really makes the app so powerful, right? I mean, Uber's only good because somehow miraculously they have convinced everybody to get on the road. I mean, they probably are causing horrible traffic jams as I think about it. But they've convinced everyone to get on the road so that when you want a car, there's always seems to be a whole bunch of little cars on the app driving around waiting for you, right? In fact, you might not have seen. Yeah, sure.
Does that mean the specialists will get paid per job that they accept, or they're paid for the time they're online and waiting?
Depends. It really depends. When we're running the service with our opening hours, they get paid for being online, whether they're working or not. But if we make it, the objective here would be to make this available to work whenever you to be able to hang up the laundry at 10 o'clock in the morning and help someone on the other side of the earth, right? We have a lot of growing number of universities in the UK that are coming online, and for us to be able to serve them the same way we're trying to serve students in New Zealand and Australia requires a lot of time shifting. And so that's part of what we're trying to figure out. Yeah. If we get it right, that will be amazing. But if it doesn't work the first couple of times people try it, they might never try it again. Yeah.
Do you have an assumption that there's this massive unmet demand in Connect Live? Because our experience in Studiosity is something like 95% writing feedback, 5% Connect Live. And you know, so there's innovation going into the Connect Live the operation.
Yeah, we do.
Right.
We think that the questions are all there. The reason writing feedback is so compelling, and don't worry, we're investing a lot in that as well. But the reason it's so compelling is there's two things. One, it's always open, and you don't ever have to wait to use it. And two, it's a very low level of investment that a student has to make. It takes a minute or two to go through the process of uploading a draft. And then they get this personalized feedback in a matter of hours or the next day. So the ROI, the return on investment for that student is really, really high. The level of stress that they have, though, is not as high as a student who's sitting there really struggling with a question that needs resolution before an exam or before going to bed or whatever it happens to be. We know that the demand is there. We've seen it in other areas of our work. We haven't really tailored the Connect Live service to tertiary students' needs yet. But that's really what I think will reveal, a lot more need. I mean, I've often likened, what we're trying to do with Studiosity. It's funny because a lot of people's initial assumption is this thing you built, this is really disruptive. This is really going to throw our world upside down, and we're gonna end up with a totally different kind of academic support situation. And we're not sure we have the fortitude to go through with that, so maybe we'll just pretend like you didn't ever talk to us, and we'll just assume that everything is fine because that's what all of our folks are telling us. And the reality has been, in almost every instance, that what's really happening is it's like shining a light in a dark cave, and we're revealing student need that just was never going to be met through existing channels anyway. And then bubbling up more queries and requests for help from existing support staff. So I know at JCU, for example, the level of demand for academic support, in fact, it went up a bit after a really big year launching Studiosity at the university, which is counterintuitive to what you might think, but actually makes quite a lot of sense when you think our universities have twice as many students as they did 10 or 15 years ago. Many of them, all the students are learning at least partially online in some hybrid mode, and in a lot of universities, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% at UNE or Charles Sturt are learning online. We don't know what we don't know. And if there's a lot of students out there that are toiling away in the dark, how can we get them to bubble up their concerns in some way? And I think that's a lot of what's happening right now. There are 500,000 international students and another 1 million domestic students. It's a lot of students out there. How many can we realistically deliver a personalized one-to-one experience to? We have to ask ourselves that.
Sorry, Joshua. We've seen big variations in the proportion of Connect Live to writing feedback from university to university. So what would the average be? Probably maybe 75% writing feedback, 25, something like that. But have seen some universities where it's half Connect Live. It's hard to know exactly why, but maybe promotion in certain faculties where maths and sciences there's a need. It really does vary quite a lot.
Yeah.
Just cycling back to the point that was made earlier, and just sort of, pointing out on Sherwood's slide about the need for your app to be a comparable experience for everything else that competes for attention online. If you are competing with the Snapchats of the world and the Ubers of the world in terms of fluidity and design, then this becomes quite a joyful experience for somebody to use. And as good as things like Blackboard and Moodle are, the fluidity and the UX doesn't necessarily compare to the likes of Snapchat for a millennial. So if you are driving more students to the app because they actually enjoy using it, it's not being used out of necessity, then maybe that does provoke more demand for academic support because it's not seen as this onerous task, it's actually seen as something that's fun and collaborative and really, really joyful to use. So,
I actually see it as it shows the student, it gives the student a safe space to ask what they perceive as stupid questions, and having asked and received feedback, they're more empowered to go and find more. And we see that a lot. So the requirement on our academic skills team, I think, has probably a good 25%, 30% up since we put in Studiosity. And the student, we are actually asking the students, and they say, we always knew you were there, but we didn't think you were there for us. Interesting.
Yeah.
So they just sort of really empower, and I think that's, in itself is a win.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, and that's that's probably one of the more dramatic examples of making available this online, anonymous, sort of very personal experience.
It's not, because we know exactly who's used it.
I know, but
The irony of the enabler.
right. Well, and the fact is that there was that old cartoon, The New Yorker, way back when. This on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Right? This dog typing away. Well, the reality is, obviously, ever since Edward Snowden, we've realized that on the internet, the government knows somebody knows everything about what you're doing, and God knows what's being tracked. But right, I mean, we make it very clear that this is being provided by your university, and so this information, your identity and the specialist, entirely separate. No communication, no potential for contact. But your activity is absolutely going to be reported back to the university, and and if you're not happy with that, then just don't opt into the service. And, 1 out of 1,000 people decides not to do that. But that's part of GDPR, and the pleasures of the general data protection.
This is a generation, Jack, that shares everything on the internet.
Right? Exactly. When you think of what they have shared, this is pretty modest, right? I really don't understand. I don't understand how to solve this math equation. Forget about what's on Facebook or Instagram. Yeah. What else? This is a good opportunity to ask any question you would like. Yeah.
Some of ours in Western Australia.
Yeah.
So we only get to 10 here.
Right. Until and that has always been a challenge for us. This is one of the reasons that the big push into mobile for us is really all about making this an on-demand, 24/7 Connect Live experience, right? And we've sort of come to that conclusion because it's just a very expensive proposition to schedule people to be online in a way that doesn't use any of this mobile technology. Between 3 p.m. and midnight, 6 days a week, is, we promise we will have these specialists online and you won't have to wait very long, and we're going to do our best to make this all work. If you can, Angela, if you can get WA to bring back daylight savings, we can give you an extra hour. But I know that's a problem. That's probably not going to be solved, sadly, or in Queensland. But we're going to solve this on these mobile apps. We're going to make it possible so that a student in Mandurah or Kwinana is going to be able to say, or just anywhere in Western Australia is going to be able to say, I want some help with chemistry or physics or some math question or an accounting question or something more advanced, a second or third year science related topic. And we'll be able to say, we'll have someone here in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And we're, Sherwin has said we're definitely not letting specialists do providing any actual feedback in the app, but we'll see. There might be some opportunities for us to let that conversation actually start on the phone and then move to the desktop when that's needed. And that potentially means that, your students can be logging in at way past their bedtime, or when they wake up in the morning, and maybe they're getting help from someone in Halifax at that point, or Calgary.
Yeah, we're bringing on more people in the UK, more specialists in the UK.
Yep.
Potentially that's a better fit. Would that cause any concerns? I mean, these people have to meet all the same standards,
Yeah.
UK-based,
And-
core subjects.
Yeah, and the same thing in Canada as well. Look, it's a good point. We're very, very focused on that the quality of the experience is indistinguishable based on the geography of the specialist. So, and I don't think we've ever, the standards are very, very consistent, and the thresholds, the application process, the onboarding process, the mentoring, people. And, as Jack mentioned, one thing that we do, he said, you might have heard him say, we have this chat system where all the specialists talk to each other, and a mentor like Jack or one of the other mentors is moderating a conversation there. So there's a real community of specialists, they really, and we're doing a lot. Something Denise is working on, part of her team, is to build a whole community amongst the specialists so that, wherever they happen to be, they feel really like they are part of the team as well. Any more comments before we have a sandwich?
Can I ask a question, Jack?
Yeah.
Group? We'll probably ask you to provide some feedback about the experience you've had over the last day and a half. But seeing as you're here, was there anything in particular on the agenda that attracted you to actually come to the symposium? Anything specific? Because that helps us to think about what we might offer you next year. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah.
I came to hear Chris because
Right.
in the maths education world, tertiary level, he's a very valuable and respected person.
Great, thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Well,
You
we'll
tee you
ask-
up again for next year, Chris. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to, Jed's just reminded me, we're going to share all the presentations. They've all been recorded, for better or worse. And so we'll have that all online in some form. And so if you want to share those with colleagues or whatever you would like to do, it's be a really nice way to, there was a fair amount of interest that would have meant we just would have had to find a bigger space, and we weren't really able to do that. So we did sort of cut off registrations for this symposium. But my sense has been each one of these has been, we've done the last 3 years, has been better than the last, and that they're just a really, really good opportunity for people to share a lot, talk, realize that we're not all, there are no stupid questions, and we're all struggling with the same sorts of challenges. And then to provide some of that feedback for us, especially back into the product. This is as close as you're going to get to really being able to say what you would like and seeing that potentially come to fruition in the next 12 months. We're a small enough organization that this is really these sorts of moments, and some of the student user group conversations we have are really, really, we value them enormously. So your attendance here gives you an outside voice in that process. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming, and I just appreciate all of your contributions. It's been really, really great for us. I hope it's been as enjoyable for you, and enjoy some lunch, and have a lovely, lovely weekend wherever you are headed. And be grateful for Uber. I know it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Thank you.